Bonjour tout le monde, ça va? Pues, je m'appelle Debbie, je suis irlandaise, j'habite à Mallorca et je suis désolée pour que mes français est très mal. Okay, so component-driven repo for a component-driven world. I'm Debbie O'Brien, I'm head developer advocate at Bit. I'm going to try and talk slow, so just do this movement if I'm speaking really fast. I'm an open source contributor, speaker, teacher, blogger, YouTuber, like probably many of you. And I love sport, cycling, running, paddle, skiing. I'm a 4th-degree black belt in Taekwondo, so don't fight with me. And I actually used to work for Nuxt, so you probably know the Nuxt, the Vue framework, by the French brothers, Sébastien and Alexander Chopin. So last year, my offices were in Bordeaux, only I couldn't go because we were all locked up, but that's it. I'm a GitHub star, a Google developer expert, a media developer expert, and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. And this photo here is actually of me at a technical conference in Antarctica. Yes, Antarctica. The first tech conference was in Antarctica just before COVID happened, and I was there. Just a couple of photos just to show you it's absolutely impressive. I hope one day more people get to go there because it's a fantastic, incredible part of the world. So yeah, that's cool. Fun fact about me, I was the first English-speaking student in open classrooms. I needed to learn JavaScript to get a better job because I only had HTML and CSS. And it was very hard living in Spain to find someone that was going to teach me JavaScript. I found open classrooms. They were trying to reach into the English-speaking market, and I became their first student. They created a video on me, never knowing that one day I would actually make it so far. And they created another video of my journey, so you can see it on the actual homepage of Open Classrooms. And yeah, I'm here today thanks to Open Classrooms, Matthew and Pierre, so many of you as well, I'm sure, are also here thanks to Open Classrooms. So France is very good for teaching people JavaScript. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about the modern web. The modern web is component-driven, right? Everything is components. React, Next, Angular, Vue, Nuxt, Node, Lit, Svelte. Who here is a front-end developer? Hands up. Yeah, quite a few. You're good. What about back-end developers? Okay, it's pretty even. What about full stack? I mean, nowadays, we're kind of all full stack in a way sometimes. Any like designers out there? No, they all stayed at home. Okay. Project managers? Yeah, they stayed at home too. Great. Okay, and what about DevOps? I know you all love DevOps these days. Yeah, a couple of DevOps people. Great. So we all know what components are. We're all building component. And basically, I actually stole these slides. These are from Matt Billman, the CEO of Netlify. He gave a keynote talk on the Jamstack conference, and I stole his slides because they're really good. How it's going. Monoliths are moving to APIs. Git has transformed the web. We're building in components and pre-building in JavaScript. And trend number 3 is what I'm going to focus on, thinking in components. So everyone is going towards components. It's not just what I'm saying. The CEO of Netlify also said it. So we're all living in a perfect world, right? We're all building components. Everything's great. Our code base is fantastic. So it's all good, right? Or are we? Who has the most perfect code base in the world? Not one hand. Oh, my God. Okay, so really, this is what building apps in 2021 looks like. Right, we're building applications, and everyone is just like, throwing more components on top of, one architecture. Everyone's like falling over each other. There's no kind of like system going on. There's no team ownership, especially in the front end. And it's just a little bit of a mess. So let's go back in time. Let's see where we started. So we started off with monoliths. We started off where everything is composed all in one piece. jQuery, PHP, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Who actually is still working like this? Not many. Okay, that's good, because we have evolved. That's great. I remember times like this. It was terrible. I only did the HTML and CSS, though. We then kind of separated everything and basically put back-end and front-end separate, which is the best thing you can ever do, right? I love you back-enders, but I want you over there. And then the back-end, they got very clever. And they started creating microservices. So they kind of knew what they were doing, and they said, we don't just want to have one big monolith. We want to like separate things out into microservices, and then they can be deployed independently, and everything can be used a lot easier. And yeah, they did a great job. So basically, excuse my artwork, but kind of now looks like this. And what are microservices? I mean, we have a lot of back-end developers here, so you all know, but basically, your application is a collection of loosely coupled services, split in terms of responsibility and knowledge, incremental updates, independent deployments, smaller code bases, and better scalability. Like, this is perfect, right? Why can the front end not have this? We have this in the back end, but not in the front end. So the front end is still a monolith, still that one big piece. We're building that one React application or a Vue application, and we're basically throwing everything inside that one code base. But you're building React applications, right? They're modern, right? So what's the problem? We're building React, Vue, Svelte, Angular. It's a modern application, so this looks good. Why is there a problem with this? Components are tightly coupled and nested inside the app. When we create applications, we literally put all our components in that application. What happens when we need to create another application? We now have this problem of this one component. Maybe it's a big component like a booking engine or a shopping cart, and we need to share that component across another application. That's when we have problems. So the front-end monolith, basically we have one code base. And we have no team ownership. It's really hard to turn around and say, okay, you're the product team, and you own the product page and all the product components, and you're the, the customer support team, and you own those components. Everything's in the one code base, so you can use GitHub, and you can kind of say, right, code owner is this one, but everyone can touch everyone else's code. There's only one version, so there's a lot of components. Someone makes a change to a version of a component, breaks another person, everyone goes crazy, and it's not fun. So it's very hard to scale like this. And there's only one build, right? If you're changing one component, you have to rebuild the whole application. Now, there are tools that have tried to make it better, of course, but still not really there yet. So when we're scaling to multiple applications, and we're moving so much into a tech world where companies have just literally had to change everything, all go online, and all of a sudden we need so many more applications. So you have this situation. You have 3 applications, and they all kind of have similar needs, like the shopping cart component. So what do we do? How do we get that checkout component, that component, into 3 different applications? Now, obviously, there are a couple of ways. And one of my favorite is, let's just duplicate it, right? It's easy. That's what we all do. How many people have just copied a component and put it in another one, right? Yeah. So duplicating the component is a quick and easy way of doing something. But then you have lots of code to maintain. You've got to maintain 2 versions of this. You're going to have inconsistency over the different applications, and you're basically just reinventing the wheel by creating and duplicating components. And then when you have to update the component over multiple apps, it's very time-consuming. Now, you might say, yeah, but that's not going to happen. And I know one company who basically had to update their logo across 60 applications, and it took months by the time they got through all the people they had to get through. So, yeah, just not good. You could package the components, just put them up into NPM separately, but then you've got like a hell of a lot of packages to maintain, a lot of package JSONs, all those dependency issues that you've got to control, and it's really hard to discover components. I don't know if you've ever sent a lot of components to NPM. NPM wasn't built for finding components, so it's really a nightmare. They're great for an NPM module, etc., but not for individually putting components. Put 1,000 components up to NPM, tell your developers to find them, be a nightmare. So we need a solution, right? And that's when people come up with the idea, well, let's just build in monorepos. Let's put all our applications into one big repo, and then we can easily share components, right? Great. But monorepos is one of these words, right? It's got a couple of pros, it's got cons. The pros of monorepos, it improves speed, right? You can work faster because everything is available to you. You have all the components. You've just got to go to the folder, take it, put it in whatever application you want. So sharing code and reusing has become very easy. The dev experience is pretty good, right? Because you've access to everything. It's a free world. It's kind of cool. And its large-scale refactoring is easy. So if you need to change something, you can change everything because you have ability to see everything that's going on in the monorepo. Cross-team collaboration becomes easy because everyone has access to everything. And standardization is good as well because, you're all using the one code base, so everyone has the same standards, ESLint, etc. So It's a pretty good solution. However, the tooling wasn't really built for monorepos. And it's not the tooling's fault. Lerna, for example, tried to solve it, but Lerna wasn't built for monorepos. So the tooling is an issue. Git wasn't built for it either. So you've got like massive git pull, git push. Everything is like taking so long. Even your IDE can slow down if you have to like clone a massive repo. Now, GitHub have come up with some solutions, code spaces, for example, where you can have the dev environment in the cloud, and now it doesn't take so long. But again, it's just a solution for one part of the problem. Visibility and discoverability. Again, it can be good because in the pros, you have access to all those components. But it's hard to actually really discover them and see them. You can find the code of the component by searching in VS Code, but how do you actually visualize that component? How do you see what it looks like? It's easy to break each other's code, right? You can update a component, and you have no idea who it's going to affect, what it's going to break. Onboarding developers can be very hard. A lot of junior developers are starting, and all of a sudden, they've got this massive code base, and it's like, just go swimming, fish around, see what you can find. And they just want to concentrate on what they need to build. They shouldn't have to deal with this massive, massive monorepo. And of course, builds are slow, right? Because now you're building all your components plus all your other applications. Again, like I said, there are tools like NX that help with that and do incremental builds and stuff. But again, it's not a perfect solution. And team boundaries and ownership. So yeah, it's like, how can you say you can only touch that folder and you can only touch that folder? It's just like there's no real boundaries and ownership. So I asked a question on Twitter. What do you love or hate about monorepos? Because, I don't know. Do people love them? Do people hate them? And this is what I got. So there was a lot of feedback, actually, and a lot of people love monorepos. They really, really, really do. I was surprised. And some people hate them. But a lot of people had in common was the tooling. The tooling is the issue. Crappy tooling. Tooling hasn't helped. And Brandon actually has a great answer there. He loves the shared code between apps and libraries, visibility, collaboration, consistency, ability to standardize, single package versions, but hates insufficient tooling, which makes the experience bad, can lead to bloated CI time, lots of ad hoc scripts. So that's the problem that we need a solution for. And the same goes when you're scaling one large app. So you might not be working with multiple applications. Maybe you only have one app. That's also an issue, right? You still have that problem. It's still hard to discover components across that one massive application. And it's still hard to give teams ownership. And you still are all fighting over one main branch, and merge conflicts are happening quite a lot. And there's no internal versioning for your components. One long build time. And you're basically managing multiple deployments all the time, every time something changes. So let's break down the front-end monolith once and for all. Easy, right? Let's do it. Come on, we can do it together. All we've got to do is let teams own features. We start off with this. One team, you own this feature, you need to build like this, and don't worry about whatever the other team are doing. That's not your issue. Just concentrate on what you need to do. So you could have a support team, for example, and the support team might have a form component that has a create support request. And they're in charge of the widget component, which is an online chat widget, a page component, which is like, the support tickets page, another page component, which is the dashboard for support, and that's all they have to worry about. It's kind of like a mini app almost, which, makes up the rest of the app. Then you have a product team, right? The product team would have a widget component that's a shopping cart, a hook component, like that gets the product information, a widget that's a product card, and a page component that puts all those products together on the page. That's all they have to worry about. Simple, right? And then you have the design team. Many people call them, like the design systems or your base components. And these are your simple components like your button, your card, your logo, your tooltip, etc. That can be used by any of the teams to easily build up the rest of those components. And that creates consistency. And basically, the design team are only having to worry about those components, but those components can be used by the other teams. Simple, right? So basically, the support team creates their components, and they deploy it to the support scope. The product team create their components, and they deploy it to the product scope. And the design team create their components and deploy it to the design scope. But what's a scope, right? So a scope is like a next-gen microservice, allowing teams to own and expose APIs that include both front-end APIs, back-end APIs, and even node modules. I know, big words there. So every scope can have its own repo. So if you're working with GitHub repos, the support team can have a repo, the product team can have a repo, the design team can have a repo. Now, they don't necessarily. You can have them all in one. That's totally cool as well. So scopes and repos are not equals, just they can be, or you can have many scopes in one repo or one scope to one repo. The choice is yours. So when we do this, teams own features. They work independent from other teams. They have separate build pipelines, which all you DevOps people love. They can test everything independently without having to test, the other people's code. And they can ship components individually, which is very, very important. You make one change to one component, you ship one component. Teams want autonomy. That's what they want, so why not give it to them? And then apps, of course, are composed from all these components. So once you have all these components, you can compose one app, many apps as you want, very easily and very fast. So, for example, this is a demo project I created. It's a beautiful shop if you want to buy shoes. And here is the logo comes from the base scope. And the base scope, basically, the component is the logo, and it's built up here in the header component. The e-commerce scope is feeding down to the product card, so the product card comes from there. And in this case, the hero component is coming from the shoe store scope. All these are separate GitHub repos, and this application is made up of all these components coming from these three scopes. So to be component-driven basically means that components are truly isolated. They're scoped to a particular team. They're independently versioned, independently released. They're no longer coupled to the app, so they no longer live side by side in the application. And they can be consumed in the app, in any app, in many apps. Cool, right? But how do we even do that, right? Anyone have the answer? No. Oh my God, that's why you're all here. That's good. Okay, I have the answer for you. So let's go back to the future. Are you ready? Hold on tight. So welcome to Bit. I told you I work at Bit, and I'm going to tell you what Bit is. So Bit is a solution for component-driven development. Let me tell you how it works. So in Bit, you can actually work in a monorepo. People still love monorepos. That's cool. So you can build all your components in one monorepo if you want. So in here, in this example, I've got my base UI components, e-commerce components, the perfume store, the sports store, electronics store, and shoe store. The difference is that all these components have their own version, their own individual version. So any change I make to the button component, if I'm working in a monorepo structure, everything that uses that button component will get an automatic update and will take that new button component. So all that is done for you. No package JSONs to maintain, no dependencies to maintain. It's all done for you. It's kind of cool. Now, you can also work in multi-repos if you like. So depending on how you want to structure your team, how big your company is. So the base UI repo here, this is like one GitHub repo with the base UI, and the e-commerce has all the e-commerce components in another one. And then the stores are all kind of put together as like all the applications together, and they're just using each other. The e-commerce uses components from the base UI, the shoes store uses components from the e-commerce and from the base UI, and everything just gets built like by piecing things together. Again, you could basically just decouple all your code bases. You can have one Git repo for every single application, as well as for your components. So base UI repo, this is actually how I built it. But I actually started as a smaller, I started with everything together, and then I actually ended up splitting it up. And this is the great thing, that you can actually choose one way, and as your company scales, as your business scales, you can say, right now, we need to split this team into two, so let's separate it out into different repos. That's the kind of cool thing, you have the power to do it. And this is kind of what it looks like. Don't worry about the code, my React skills are not 100%. So here I'm basically importing a button, and as you can see, I'm importing it from LearnBit React, that's my company, that's what I called it, because I'm a developer advocate. And base UI is the scope name, and UI is just a namespace, the folder, and button is the component. And it's this component, this is like the base UI scope, So it's importing the component from itself. Now we can't use like a relative import here because if you like had dots, etc., it would just be a nightmare to. It just wouldn't work, right? So we have to basically import from the node modules. So that's what Bit is doing. It's looking for the node modules. That's why it's got the @ sign there. It's finding the company I've called Learn Bit React. It's finding that base UI scope, the UI, the button, and imports it and uses it. And that's how it's available in any application. So in this e-commerce scope, I now am importing the button from the one we just seen, from the base UI. I'm also importing the card from the base UI, but I'm also importing components from this particular scope as well, from this e-commerce. So yeah, in VS Code, I can have two completely separate, VS Codes, two completely separate repos, and just import the components from one to the other with no maintenance. Kind of cool. So teams can have ownership, right? Now, I know you're probably looking at this and you see my photo only. That's because I'm the only one on my team. But we are hiring, so if you want to come and work with me, then your photo can be up there. But you can have to imagine that as a large company with different teams owning different scopes. So in one case, the Learn Bit React, that's my company name, and then base UI is the scope. And that's like feeding down, and the e-commerce one is using all those components, not all of them, but some components from the base UI, and that's feeding all the applications. And you can see at all time who your dependents are and which repos are dependent on you, which means obviously never delete this because they're being used, but you can see at all times what's going on. And you can also see who your dependencies are. So the shoe store, for example, depends on this e-commerce repo or e-commerce scope and the base UI scope. So you can always visualize everything, which is kind of really cool. So in Bit, when you create a component, and you can create components like React components, they're just components, but with some extra things like documentation, which I know you all hate writing documentation, but documentation is really important. If you document how your component can be used, more people will probably use your component. So this is very simple documentation. You can see the name of the product card. It's a very simple explanation. And what you're seeing here is a live playground. So this means someone can basically go to that component and, change the name, for example, see what it would look like with a really long name. Would the CSS break? Would it be good? And you can test it out before you even use it. And this kind of gives you confidence that this component is going to do what you want it to do. You can also embed your Figma files. So if you're using Figma, you can have the design right there in the documentation of the component. This makes it easier to see if your design is consistent. Then your project managers can check and basically look and see, yeah, that looks good. And it's just easier. And you can also just click the button and it goes direct to that Figma file, and you never have to try and find all those Figma designs. I can never find them. They're always all over the place. So this makes it much easier. And you can view components in different states or different compositions. So you can create multiple different ways of seeing your component. For example, in this one, I added available colors in there in the converse one, right? It's just another extra component. Probably should be styled better, but it's there. So you can actually see what it would look like if it had that other extra component in there, and you can create lots of different states for your component. You can also view the component props. So I'm using TypeScript, which helps a lot because then this is automatically created for you once you're creating your types. And then you can basically see which types are required, so which props are required, what type they are, if there's any defaults, and the description, which explains what it does. So now when I want to use this product card component, I know what's available to me, I know what I can't have, and I know if I want to use this, what I'm getting, and if not, I can contact this team and say, hey, can we make an adjustment because I need to add or whatever. So visibility and discoverability. We can easily find components by literally just doing Command K and searching across that whole scope. So if we're looking for a product card, we can just easily search for it, and up comes all these possibilities, and then we can kind of choose it, then we can open it and see it, and we can see if that's the component that we are looking for. But we can also search across multiple scopes. So you might say, where does the product card live? Does it belong to the design team, or does it belong to the e-commerce team? And maybe you don't know that, and that's fine, because you can just search across your whole company profile, and then you can search for whatever component, and then it will just bring you to the correct scope. You can also filter out kind of dependencies. Maybe you don't want to use SAS in your project, so you want to make sure SAS isn't there, or you're using testing library, so you can like filter by that. Filter by size, maybe you want to have a particularly small component, so you can also kind of filter out things as well. And you can use your component anywhere. So there's a green Use button there, and basically if you click that button, it will give you the possibility to install your component using Bit if you're working in a Bit project, using NPM or using Yarn if you prefer Yarn over NPM. So that means you can use this component in any of your applications. Obviously, if you're building a React component, you can use it in a Gatsby application, a Next.js application, create React application, etc. Every component has an independent version, and this is very, very, very important. So you can see here, this component, the latest one is 1.0.13, and that menu there, I can actually just scroll down and click a different version. That will then show me the component in that version state. I will see the documentation for that component, the composition for that component, the tests for that component, the dependencies for that particular version. And I can choose to use that version if I don't want to use the latest version. Now, you should all use the latest version of a component, right? Maybe, depends. You could be updating all your apps, and maybe, I don't know, you're changing your design system, moving from SAS to Tailwind, for example. Well, maybe one application is not ready to take on this change. They haven't got there yet, and that's totally cool. So they can stay on version 0. Whatever, and the other applications on version 1, and when they're ready to update, they can update. Once your components are in different repos, you don't have to update unless you want to. Just like any package, you decide which version you want to stay on and which you want to update. But you can see the versions at all times, which is cool. You can also view your component dependencies. So this product card, you can see what components are used to build this product card. Again, everything should be split up into very small components. So those components, like a button component, can be used throughout the application. There's an image component. And these are all used to compose that product card component. So I can see what version of each component I'm using at all times. And just another example of it is like the About page. And this one shows you just, other kind of ways. This one is using the MDX About page as well as the layout. And it's using the hero, which uses the button, the heading, and also the base hero that's coming from the base UI. So you can see what's going on at all times. Now, you might see the menu there and kind of wonder, okay, what are we talking about here? Very UI, React-based. This is a React project. We also have the same in Angular. But we're also using entity components here, which are node components. Those node components can be used across the Angular app and the React application because, it's just node. And also using MDX, as you've seen here. So we can have an MDX as a component. So it's not just React components, but anything that's basically JavaScript. So we can have consistent and standardized tooling, right? This is really important. And we want to basically have all our tools the same, all our rules the same, right, across all our projects. Now, if you're working in one mono repo, for example, you might have it easier to manage, but if you start separating things out, then you start worrying about standardization. What if you have an ESLint rule in one repo, and in a different one you have a different rule, and then you have all these problems, and prettiers playing up, and et cetera, et cetera. So with Bit, it's very easy to create what we call an environment. So you create an environment called, my React environment, for example. And in that environment, I decide to have my ESLint config, my prettier config, my Jest config, etc. And I apply those rules onto those configs, apply it to that environment. That environment is then a component. Everything is a component in Bit. So now I have this component that's a developer environment that can then be applied to all my components in any project or repo I'm working on. So the components are now using my specific environment, and maybe I'm a junior developer. I don't need to worry about this. I just want to develop. So everything's going to work the way it should. And the team lead, they basically come along and say, oh, that junior developer is creating console logs again. We need to add another rule. And they just add it to the developer environment, create a new version, and that version then just gets applied to the workspace that you're working on and to all those components. So that's kind of really cool. Now, another great thing, imagine you're not even using Bit, and today you walk out of here and you go, okay, yeah, cool, but I don't want to use Bit. That's cool. And you have 5 repos, and they're all in Next.js, for example. And you're still sharing config across different applications. So you can still just use Bit to create one component and call it the ESLint component. I have a demo project with this created, and basically you can have that one component called ESLint, my ESLint, whatever, with that one rule, or 20 rules, or how many rules, and then just basically in your ESLint, you import that component in all your projects. And now you have standardization across all Next.js applications just by creating one Bit component just to basically manage your ESLint and your tooling. So many possibilities, and standardized tooling is so important. So I really encourage you all to check it out, even just for that. Save you so much time. So moving on, you can now reuse components in any app. Like I said, the components are basically components. They're now like individual packages, individual versions. And when you're building your application, you're just kind of piecing components together to build one application, which means then you can build multiple applications very, very easily. So again, what does it mean to be component-driven? Remember, components are truly isolated. They have their own package JSON in a node modules folder. They're completely isolated, and you don't have to actually manage any of that. It's all done for you. They're scoped to a particular team, so every team owns specific components. Everything is individually versioned, so you just manage one component, change that version, that gets its version, and then depending on where your component is, it's going to get updated, or if you're in another repo, you decide to update and take the new version if you want to. They're independently released, so you literally just deploy one component if you only change one component. And they're no longer coupled to the app. Now, you could do, if you want to, you can still build in Next.js and have all your components, and you can still build them in Bit and still have them all inside the Next.js application if you want to. It's completely up to you, but they can still be used in another application, so they're not really coupled to the app. And then they can be consumed in the app, in any app, in many apps, and that's what we want. We want to reuse components. We don't want to keep duplicating things, reinventing the wheel. So this is a cool thing that you can also do, and I love this. You can import a component to change code from any repo. I know. So basically, imagine, I don't know, a scenario where you're working in one repo, and then you're saying, okay, I've got all these other components, like this product component is in one repo, and I'm working in a different repo, and I don't want to have to clone a repo just to make one change, for example. I want to just be able to work with it, because maybe you're doing some testing on it, there's a lot of work you need to do, so you want to also kind of like, instead of creating NPM links and see how it is, you want it right there in your code base. And you can do that, which is really cool. So at the bottom there, you can see Bit import. So importing and installing, it's very confusing, I know. Installing means installing it like in node modules, and importing means like bringing it into your code base. So I want to bring the component in so we have access to the component files. So you just basically run this command, and depending on your company name, my company is LearnBit React, and e-commerce is my scope, UI is the namespace, product card. And then basically, bang, it's now in my repo. Here's my code. Now, there's a lot of files here. We're probably used to making a component and having less files, but that's up to you. Basically, with Bit, every component is a folder, and inside it, you have the component file, the index file that exports it. You have the test file. You don't have to write tests if you don't want to, but you should. CSS, if you're using CSS modules, you might not be. You could be using Tailwind. Documentation. You don't have to write documentation if you don't want to, but you should. And composition, so you can see your components across different states, etc. This is actually very important, because that's how you will see the component as you're developing, right? You're basically, what I was showing you with everything, that's your developer environment, but it's also your environment in the cloud. So yeah, this is my component. I have access to all those files. I can make those changes. I can play around with it. I can fix things. I can do things with it. And once I'm happy that this component is fixed or is ready to be exported, I can basically just tag a new version of it using bit tag. And I'm tagging all here because I'm lazy, but I could just tag that one component. And I'm adding a message. I'm updating the card. That's a terrible message, but you should do better messages. And then basically export it means, push it up to that scope, so it's in the cloud, and it's now available for everyone to use and consume the new version if they want to have the new version of this product card. So now what happens, right? Now I have the code of someone else, another team's code in my code base. That's a nightmare, right? What happens? What do I do? Just delete it? So basically, we have a command for that. It's not delete. We don't want to delete it because that would delete. We want to eject it. So basically, just eject. And then you eject it out of your code base. So now this component is not there anymore. It's now basically where it belongs. And obviously, when the other team that's working on that product card, they will know to kind of import the new version. When they start using it, we'll say a new version, or this needs to be brought down, and you will bring down the changes in those files. So it's really kind of cool to work with the teams like this, because it makes the developer experience much better, because you have access to those components depending on how you create your teams and what kind of permissions you give your teams. So, updating components. Yeah, at the moment, there's a little bit of manual things needed to be done with updating a component. When you come into like your new repo, you're going to have to basically manually update it. And if you made changes on that component and now you're updating it, you will be asked, there'll be merge conflicts, and you'll be asked to fix the merge conflicts to take your version or their version. So basically working the same as Git, it works the same, and you can fix that. But there is some automatic component updates coming very soon. With Ripple CI, which is kind of like our very cool continuous integration system, which will basically take a component, for example, take that button component, right? And we change the button component and we make it, I don't know, completely different look and feel. And now that's going to affect the product card, it's going to affect the header, it's going to affect the hero component. So we'll be able to simulate the changes to all these components across all those repos. Whoever's using that component, we'll be able to simulate it, and you can see it, and then you can decide, yes, that looks good, accept, or, oh my God, they broke everything, no way, I'm not accepting that, and you kind of like push it back. So this is actually, it's working internally for us. We're dogfooding it and using it, so it's not released yet, but it's almost ready, and it's very, very, very cool. So that's going to make life a lot easier very soon. Native ESM support is also coming very soon, so if you want to use ESM modules and stuff with dependency, etc., this is all, or with versioning, so this is all coming soon, as well as module federation. Those of you who want to build, micro front end, module federation, etc., we have Zach Jackson working for us on this, and basically, yeah, they're working on that to have module federation support with versioning, etc. So basically, build component-driven, build with Bit. Bit is completely open source, so it's free to use. What I showed you was basically the cloud environment, but the dev environment looks the same. The only thing is the menu is different. You can then decide if you want to self-host your components, and I wrote a whole tutorial on that, and you can completely self-host them yourself. You can create your own DevOps kind of thing. You can put them in Docker containers. You can do whatever you want, and it's completely free. You don't have to pay us any money. Yes, because I love open source. But also then there is a cloud thing. Are you using the cloud? The cloud is also free, but then it has like other kind of enterprise stuff. If you're having like a massive corporation and you want all these kind of like team permissions and all this other stuff, but that's kind of like, for companies to worry about, not for you to worry about. As developers, Bit is completely free to use, so do check it out and do play around with it. And basically then you can say goodbye to the monoliths. So back-end are now using microservices, and the front-end are using components, and it's kind of really simple and really cool. So to get started with Bit, it's very simple. You just use npx and install teambit BVM. BVM is like our Bit version manager, so like the Node version manager. Install it, and then Bit.new React to my workspace. It's a little demo project I created, and you can just play around with it, and you can just kind of see how it works and decide if it's something that you're interested in using. And you can also use Bit in an existing project. So if you've already got a Next.js application up and running, for example, or an Angular application, you can just use Bit in it, and it will add a workspace inside your application. So you don't even have to start from the beginning. And if you're already using NX and Learner, for example, and you're thinking, oh my God, I have to migrate everything, that would be a nightmare. You don't have to. You can still use NX and Learner if you want to, and just use Bit alongside it. We have some teams that are doing that. Depends on what you want to achieve and basically where you are. The great thing as well is that you can just create one component. You don't have to migrate everything over. You can just start with one component. Maybe that config component is a great component to start with. and then say, okay, this is working for me now. I really need to share that shopping cart component. Well, let's create it in Bit, and then just kind of gradually create your components so that they're easily shareable. We don't have view support yet. I know it kind of breaks my heart. Hopefully next year, but at the moment, supporting lit elements, Angular, React, React Native as well, and Node.js components. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, thank you.
These are just some demo projects. It's so nice to hear claps. I've been talking to a wall for a year and a half, so thank you for the claps, really. This is some demo projects. In case you want to scan that QR code, it will go direct to the actual projects, and you'll be able to see that ESLint config component. You'll see the e-commerce scope. You'll see the stores I created. Don't really look too deep in my code. It's not perfect, but check them out so you can kind of play around with it. There's a link to the GitHub repos, so you can even just clone the repos and play around. And basically, yeah, have fun, and merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Debbie. If you have a question, it's a good moment. And I have a...
Any questions? Everything was so clear. Yeah, everyone's just going to go and use Bit right away, right?
Directly the demo test.
Yeah. Don't make it too difficult. Come on now.
Hello. One question about managing dependencies. So it's a tough thing to manage dependencies, but also to enforce boundaries. Does Bit provide anything to make sure that when using a specific dependency, let's say we have a component that we want to expose, but we don't want to expose its internals or some specific components? Does Bit provide anything about that?
So basically, the component is going to have everything in it. So if your component is using another component, it's going to be, it's hard to kind of say, right, you can't see this, it's a secret, right? So the code is, it's not the code that is exposed. I have to look into exactly the node modules and how it's seen, but I imagine, because how it works is, it's built with a kind of a cached system, so that imagine a team deleted a component, right? That your component relies on. So they went and deleted it, and now you're thinking, oh my God, my component's going to break. It's never going to work again. So it is going to work again because there's a cached dependency of that component. If you can actually see the code of it, you'd have to go into the node modules, and I'd have to check in the node modules if I can actually how deep I can see the code. I imagine I can, but I never checked it. But you can't see it on the actual cloud. You can see the component files, but you can't see theirs. But in the node modules, I'm guessing you can, because there's a cached version of that component to stop you from ever being broken by someone else deleting something. But great question. I'll definitely check it out and see. But good.
I have another question. You had a picture of Learner in the last slide. How does Bit compare to Learner? It looks like a bit similar.
Yeah, I mean, Learner was built for managing packages, managing versioning of components, right? And Learner as a tool, it's got a lot of issues. It's not being maintained very well, I don't think, right now, which is an issue. So Learner is just so that you can work in a monorepo kind of structure and manage packages, basically. And Bit is completely different in that it kind of can compare to it for sure. But Bit is about concentrating on one component and allowing you to build a component without having to manage a package JSON, without having to worry about dependencies. All your dependencies are kind of sorted for you, which basically means you just have to concentrate on building a component and not on all the kind of hard work that Learner makes you kind of have to do, basically. Yeah.
Hello. Why do you, sorry. At my work, I use Storybook. What's the most particularity of Bit than Storybook?
Yeah, so
I'm not clear.
yeah, I know. So we have a lot of companies that also use Storybook, and that's cool. So you can just integrate Storybook with Bit. So it depends on your use case. If you already have all your stories created, then it makes sense to continue using them and use them with Bit. if you are starting from scratch, maybe you don't need everything that Storybook gives you, so it's quite just okay to use what Bit provides. So it depends on your needs. If you want to have extra stuff, like all the knobs and stuff that Storybook provides, then you just integrate it and use it. So it's basically up to you. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks. Just a question. I have trouble picturing like the deepness of the coupling with Bit. So as a mental model, is it like a NPM package or something like that? Or do you really tight your code base like, yeah, it's tightly coupled to Bit? Like in a year, if I want to eject.
If you want to eject it from, so your code is yours, as in, there's no kind of like, you're stuck in Bit. Your code is wherever you want it to be. So if you want to use GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever, your code can be there. Your code is also if you're using our cloud, your code is in the cloud, but you could be using your own Docker container, and then we don't even know your code exists, right? If you're in the cloud and you delete your Git repo, you still have access to it in the cloud. So it's very easy to then just kind of like, you can basically just import the whole repo from the Bit cloud. So basically you have the option of, that's how you can move it to different repos if you want to. So it's always stored in the cloud if you're using our cloud, and you always have a copy there. But you're never tied to Bit, because you could also just, like I use GitHub as well. I have all mine the same. But yeah, if you're using a Docker container, then everything's yours and you just, using it. And your component is not in NPM unless you particularly want it to be in NPM. So it's kind of like a proxy registry. But you could actually choose to also put it in NPM if you want to. That's again up to you. You just configure it and put it up there as well.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your talk. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
If each of our components is not linked to a single package.json, if I'm in a first application and use one component, this component using some of my dependencies, and I want to use it in another app with a different version of those same dependencies that my component relies on, is it possible that this component will not work in my second app? Because let's say I have a button, it comes from a Material UI, for example, version 15. And on the second app, I have Material UI version 17, and I want to use the same component. Is it going to break because the component for Material UI is not accepting the same props, or how is it going to behave?
I don't know if I understand exactly the question. But basically, like, you're controlling the versions. The package.json, you never see. It's in node modules. It's done automatically for you. So I don't even ever look at the package.json. I don't even know what it contains. I've seen it once, but I never, ever, ever open node modules to inspect this kind of stuff. It's just like all done for you. So if you're building your component with that one button component and you're using version 15, and then your other component uses version 16, obviously, like, when you're building it, you're going to see what props are available to you. So, and then when you're updating it, you can also, like, you can bring in the component to test it out before you tag a new version and basically, send it up there, right? But as you're developing in your workspace, you can also see everything that's going on. So if you're modifying a button, the composition of the product card automatically gets updated because it's relying on that button. So you don't have to, like, if you're in the same workspace, you don't have to change to do things. And if you're in a different workspace, then you can bring in the dependents and test the dependents out beforehand. So yeah, shouldn't break.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's okay.
Easy.
So on Bit, we could see that we could choose versions, but can components versions branch out? Say a component is updated, but we don't want to keep those changes, but still we want to make, I don't know, an improvement, a change on that previous version. Can we do that, or do we need to update the latest version of a component?
Yeah, I think you can only update the latest version. If you decide then that you want to maintain version 0 and build on top of version 0, I'm guessing that would be then creating another component separate from it. You could import it as that version, like I showed you the import thing, and then modify that code, and then, change it to basically say, right, you're now a different separate component, because at that stage, you shouldn't really be maintaining 2 versions, right? It's better to kind of like have them as separate components, because otherwise it would just be a nightmare to know how many you're kind of maintaining, right? But yeah, good question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Debbie.
you.
Thank you, bye.
Okay, au revoir. Thanks.